So, greetings and merry meet. What makes an organization or a team play at the highest level? And by highest, I mean getting a gold medal at the Olympics. Well, today our guest shares insights that helped a team win Olympic gold. And those are things that we can apply to our own life and work. So I'm Dr. Kathryn Bingham, founder of LeadUP, a veteran and woman-owned small business that serves the needs of executives, entrepreneurs, and professionals to elevate their leadership, reinvent, redesign, pivot, and change their life, change their work, and change the world. I'm also the author of Driving Pink. But today we have SeanPMurray, president and founder of Real-Time Performance and the host of the Good Life podcast. He's based outside of Seattle, and Real-Time Performance is a development firm that helps professionals achieve their full leadership potential. So with his podcast, he explores what it takes to live a satisfying and valuable life, which is perfect because I'm forever talking about integrating life and work. So Sean, welcome.
Kathryn, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me on the show. It's wonderful to be here and excited to talk about this team that won a gold medal and how they did it.
I am very excited. So I started with the question, what makes an organization or team play at the highest level? And before we get to talking about your book, and let me hold that up for people so they can see, If Gold is Our Destiny is the book. I want you folks who are reading or are watching and listening, make sure you pay attention. I'll hold it up for you again later. Tell us about your own journey and the work that you do, Sean.
Well, I help leaders and organizations reach their full potential, focusing on leadership skills, leadership development, and also organization development. So helping teams come together, build stronger teams, more effective teams, high-performing teams, and also culture, aligning that culture to strategy and aligning talent to strategy and culture. So those are kind of the areas that I work in, mostly Fortune 500 companies, small to medium-sized businesses, some nonprofits. It's really satisfying work. It's great. But it's challenging. How we crack the code on this stuff is not easy, and it usually depends on personalities and the unique situations within cultures and organizations. And so being able to write a book that studies how at least one team did it is helpful for people to understand how it might be done.
Absolutely. And one of the powerful messages, and we talked a little bit before we started, of If Gold is Our Destiny is the possibility of the pivot for both individuals and organizations from one path to another. When we have a clear vision of our objectives and our purpose. So describe some of the challenges that were faced by the U.S. volleyball program in the period before your dad got involved.
Well, the USA volleyball, first of all, volleyball was invented in the United States in the late 1890s. So it's a sport that was invented here. It started to grow here, but it actually took off even faster in Eastern Europe, even in Japan, in some other countries, Brazil. And the United States fell behind. So when it became an Olympic sport in the 1960s, we were not among the elite teams in the world, although we had elite talent. And so it was sort of interesting, and this is kind of maybe a typical kind of American idea at the time, was let's just take our all-star talent, throw it together 3 months before, 6 months before, we'll send them to Europe and I'm sure they'll do great. And they didn't. They failed miserably. It was, great talented people, but they didn't yet know how to work together as a team. And they were playing against teams like the Soviet Union, Poland, Italy. These teams had long-standing training centers and teams that played together for a long time. And so you can imagine, even if you're not a volleyball player, you can imagine, any sort of team sport, if you've got a group of people that know each other and know how to work together and know the strengths and weaknesses and really care for each other at a deeper level, then you're able to perform at the highest level. And so that's what the United States was going up against. There was one player during that era, Doug Beal, who was experienced sort of the agony of not the disappointment and almost even described as humiliation of going to these tournaments. The United States never won a medal at a major international tournament, not just the Olympics, but a World Cup or a World Championship or anything like that. And so he was determined to try something different, to pivot, like you said. He had a goal of getting to an Olympics and winning a medal, but the current path wasn't going to get him there. And so he was a player during that era, but he became the coach during the era that I write about, which was the early 1980s.
Great. And you've mentioned your dad. So your dad is Don Murray and his partner was Chuck Johnson. And they became sports psychologists for the men's national team. And they were testing and pioneering tools and methods that not only helped the team, but also support leaders and teams that are not like Olympic elite athletes. It's the folks that we would work with or who are in our communities, organizations, or the businesses that we're affiliated with. So can you share some of the processes and how they help create high performance?
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. My dad, Don Murray, as you mentioned, his partner Chuck Johnson, they went to graduate school together at the University of Oregon in the early 70s. Both got PhDs in the generally the area of organization and leadership development, although they didn't call it that at the time. My dad's PhD was in educational psychology, but generally working with organizations and teams, and they were sort of pioneering a lot of this stuff. It was pretty new at the time. There weren't a lot of people with the title sports psychologist, and I don't know if they would have considered themselves sports psychologists. They were more organizational consultants that were brought into a sports team. And so what they started to do was bring the team together after practice. Practice was a time to work on volleyball skills and volleyball strategy. And that's, of course, really, really important. You've got to be quick, and you have to have a strategy, and you've got to be able to hit and block and set and pass and all that stuff. But at the very elite level, the difference between winning and losing is often how the team works together. What they're doing together on the court and how they react when the momentum swings the other way, or how they react when one of their teammates makes a mistake. These are things that the USA national team hadn't really talked about before during that era of bringing the All-Stars together and going over to Europe and losing. So they thought, let's talk about this stuff. And so they brought my dad and his partner in, and they would have a meeting either before or after practice, and they would ask questions like, what kind of team do we want to be? How do we want to treat each other on the court when someone makes a mistake? How do we want to give feedback to our coaches if we feel like they're not moving us in the direction we want to go? How do we want to receive feedback from our coaches? How do we want to set goals, both individually? And so they had these discussions, and they introduced techniques. And there's pictures from this era. And luckily, my father wrote a number of memos because I lost my father about a year ago. So he didn't quite get to the publication of the book, which is a little disappointing, but he did get to read a bunch of the drafts and stuff. And he loved it. But he wrote all these wonderful memos that would describe these interventions. So I had a lot of material. And what's interesting is a lot of it is stuff that we do, you probably do today, Kathryn, and I do with working with groups. It's stuff that was pioneered at the time. And it was interesting to talk to some of the players because they didn't really, not all of them really understood why they were going through something like this. The typical attitude at the time was, you get better at volleyball by playing volleyball.
Yes.
Why are we in here? They actually called them the team shrinks, which was kind of an endearing, term a little bit, but they laugh about that. But so they just pushed forward, and they had the support of the coach, Doug Beal, this player turned coach that I mentioned earlier, that my father and Chuck Johnson started working with the team when Beal was still a player. And of all the players he understood, he thought, this is important. Beal knew there was a lot of things that were important to win a gold medal, but one of them was, we've got to figure out how to work together as a team. And so he brought my dad and Chuck Johnson in, and they continued to work with the team right through the 84 Olympics, even on into 88, into the 90s. And yeah, it actually led to a career doing a lot of work with Nike for my father, because he
Oh,
started working with
great.
sports teams and eventually worked with Phil Knight and the executive team at Nike. And he did the same stuff with Phil Knight and his executive team at their offsite retreats. What kind of company do we want to be? Let's talk about our values. Let's write them down. Let's figure out our purpose. Let's align with that. Let's figure out how to train and develop people that will lead the Nike way. And stuff that eventually you probably, we do a lot of work in that area. So, but that's where it all sort of pioneered, and that's the kind of work that my father and Chuck Johnson did with the team.
I love it. Now, there were a lot of shifts that took place over time for both the players and the coaches as they went through this process. What were some of the pivotal moments of the team's journey?
Well, there was one in there. I'll go through a couple. So in the early 1980s, the training center moved from Dayton, Ohio to San Diego. And that was an important move, because most of the talent in the United States at the time for volleyball was in Southern California, and they were not able to attract the elite players. They didn't want to move to Dayton and leave their families and leave Southern California. And so if the players wouldn't come to the National Training Center, they moved the National Training Center to where the players were. And that was important, because all of a sudden this incredible group of young men came onto the national team, and they mostly had grown up playing volleyball on the beach. And that was sort of important too, because at the time we're talking about indoor volleyball, court volleyball, 6-on-6. And there was no Olympic beach volleyball. If you wanted to win an Olympic medal in volleyball, you had to do it through 6-on-6 indoor volleyball. And so these players, a lot of them grew up on the beach, although they played indoor volleyball at USC and UCLA and Pepperdine, in San Diego, and a lot of these places, San Diego State. So there, with all this talent, it became apparent that they would need to figure out how to get together, how to make this team work. There was a few players from the East Coast. There were some from the West Coast. There was kind of the Easties and the Westies, and there was this culture clash. There was also a lot of cliques, the USC players, the UCLA players, and they weren't playing together. So what was really frustrating to the coaches was we have some of the best players, and these players were really good. I mean, even recognized in Europe and around the world as elite talent, but yet in 1982 at the World Championships in Argentina, this team finished 13th.
Right.
So this is 2 years before the Olympics, and this is probably the first big pivot after the move to San Diego. The coaches and the team sat down after Argentina. We're now 20 months or so before the Olympics in Los Angeles. This is going to be a huge event. They know they've qualified for the Olympics because the home country team automatically qualifies. But more importantly, not only is it going to be a home country Olympics, but for many of these players, it will be a hometown Olympics. Most of the players, 9 of the 12 at that Olympics, were from Southern California, mostly the Los Angeles area. So they were going to be playing in front of their family, their friends, their community, and they really wanted to peak at that moment. They wanted to play the best volleyball of their lives, and they wanted to medal.
Yes.
They really wanted to medal. They wanted to get on that stand somehow, but they're sitting at 13th. And to go from 13th to the medal stand has never happened before. It just doesn't, you don't move up that fast in these kinds of situations in sports mostly. So they had to really look at themselves and say, okay, whatever we're doing is not going to get us there. What do we need to do differently? And that was another big pivot. And what they decided to do, well, really the coaches and the team psychologists decided to do, was to go on an outward bound course. So we can talk about that if you want, but that was
we are going to talk about that one, because that's on my list. It was a really interesting part of the book.
Yeah.
So, let's hit on that, because they did 100-mile snow mountain climbing, trekking, multiple days. And as you mentioned, a lot of Southern California boys. So this was not just challenging with a small c, but probably challenging all caps. And the idea was that you write of is to really bring the dependencies on each other and have that be an understanding and an insight that gave the team something more than they had before. But here's the question that I have about that outward bound. So, when we have teams in companies and maybe there's been toxicity and competition, even if it's a milder form where they just haven't gelled and come together, do they need to have something that profound to have individual or team transformation? Do they, or can we do other types of interventions? What circumstances demand something extreme in order to bring a team together in the way that the Outward Bound event did for the U.S. national team at the time?
Well, I would agree that it was extreme. It was something that most of the players did not want to partake in. A few of them had a background in camping and outdoor activities, but most of them were not looking forward to spending 3 weeks in the winter,
Yes.
in Abajo Mountains in the Canyonlands National Park area of Utah. And this is a very cold part of the country in January. As you mentioned, they had snowshoes, they had 70-pound packs. You also mentioned something really important, which is they relied on each other for survival. There was dependencies, and I think that was important. And so let me just talk a little bit about what it did for the team, and then I'll come back to your question about do we need to do something this extreme. So what happened on Outward Bound for this team? Well, first of all, the coaches and one of the team psychologists was there, not my father. He somehow got out of it, but Chuck Johnson was there. And the coaches went through with the team. They thought that was important. So this wasn't just send the players, because the coaches they talked about this a lot, a part of the team. The coaches were an important part of the team, and there's a team around the team too, which included the sports psychologists, the nutritionists, and the physical therapists and everything. So they went through with this Outward Bound course, and they were reliant on each other for survival. And I think that's really important in how they developed throughout this 3 weeks, because if you can imagine snowshoeing in Utah with a pack on, especially if you're 6'7" or 8 or something, you're sinking down in the snow. It really helps if someone's breaking trail. And so someone would be out there in the front, and then you would take turns. And so just to go from point A to point B, you're helping each other. And you start to realize that you can't really get there without each other. But then when you did get to point B, you had to clear out some snow. Someone had to do that while someone was putting up the tents. Someone was clearing out a place to build a fire. Someone was gathering firewood. Someone was getting ready to make dinner. And all of this had to happen together. And so they were, in a sense, caring for each other. And I think that had an important effect on the team overall, because there was some toxicity. There was a lot of competition. Who was on the first team? Who's on the second team? Who's going to make the team? There were more players on this Outward Bound course than would actually be in Los Angeles for the Olympics. And they knew that. So they knew some players were going to get cut. And so there's a lot of pressure and a lot of individual Olympic dreams that were kind of hanging on the balance here. And they had to all still figure out how to get along. So, and there were a number of tribulations and interesting things that happened on that Outward Bound. And readers can kind of get into that it's a really fun part of the book. But I think what happened when they finally finished the course, and a couple of things more about the course. They had to do a solo where they were by themselves for several days, and they wrote in a journal, and they were asked to really reflect, why do I want to play volleyball? Why do I play volleyball? Why do I want to sacrifice for this team? Why do I what is it about an Olympic medal that I want to commit to? And what's my role on the team? And so they had to write and share some reflections. I think that was important. And also the course, if you've ever been on an Outward Bound course, the instructors slowly hand over, they're not guides. They're trying to teach the players how to navigate and orienteer in the mountains with a compass and a map, and how to survive and put up camp. And so over time, the instructors sort of allow the players to lead their own expedition. And that's an important transition that happens during that. And so they came out of it with trust. And so this kind of get a whole new level of trust, a deeper trust that allowed them to really invent a new way of playing volleyball together, which still is used globally by volleyball teams. And this is a really important team when it comes to the history of volleyball. Even today, if you talk to national teams in Europe or Japan or Brazil or anywhere around the world where volleyball is popular, Italy, they will talk about this team and what it meant to the sport of volleyball. So they came back and they did something incredible in the world of volleyball. And I don't think they could have done it without the trust. And the trust came from working together in ways outside of volleyball. And so, and understanding each other as a human being, as a complete human, not just a competitor, not just, someone who is good at volleyball, but, a companion, a brother, something that's a little deeper, a friend, not just another athlete that I'm competing with. And so do we have to do something this extreme? No. I mean, there's a lot of ways we can, as teams, come together. And I think it just starts with really understanding who we're working with on our team. I mean, even if you go around and ask people to share a little something about their history, maybe an obstacle or a challenge that they overcame in their life, and maybe they've been through cancer, maybe they lost a parent, maybe they ran a marathon or climbed Mount Everest or whatever it is, a simple activity like that where you share about yourself and listen can start to build those bonds. And there's other activities as well. So it doesn't have to be that extreme, but you do have to work on building trust and building the relationships between the people on your team if you want to be a high performing team.
That's awesome. And it's so true. So true. So ultimately, this is why the book, it comes to this head. They won. They won the gold, all right, at the 84 Olympics in Los Angeles. And the idea of winning a gold medal really offers a very clear, specific objective. We all collectively know what a gold medal is, right? And we know that a lot of things have to take place just to be eligible for being on a team, or even having that team being invited or being able to qualify to perform at the Olympics. So I'm never going to be an elite athlete, for example, right? So I'm never going to get an Olympic gold, but that doesn't mean I can't, stretch and reach for really challenging goals. So the question then is, how do you help leaders and teams identify an objective that has a powerful result? Because they have to know, they have to choose where they want to go. And there's got to be just enough stretch in there. I mean, there's got to be stretch, but it's also got to be achievable, right? So what are the things that we can do to help leaders and teams get to that point where they really know what they've got to focus on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes I refer to that as ask the question or pose the question, what's your gold medal, right? Because when I talk about this team in workshops and use the story of the team to try to teach different lessons around organization and leadership, that's a question I'll pose to leaders. What's your gold medal? And you do want it to be something significant, yet achievable, and something that's you're going to have to commit to and sacrifice in some way to get there. Otherwise, it won't be meaningful, and it won't be worthy of your effort. And so you have to ask yourself what that is. And, in some sense, in sports, it's a little easier because it's handed to you. It's well, there's an Olympics and there's a gold medal and that's the ultimate, we're going after it. But in a lot of organizations, you have to look into the future and say, okay, where are we going? What is our gold medal? What 5 years from now, how will we know that we can stand on the podium and say we did it, and let's set another goal? And that takes more effort, and sometimes it's a collective effort with your team, right? With your executive team, if you're an executive. But I think it's really important. That's one of the pivotal, or one of the essential elements of a leader, is being able to look into the future and say, this is where we're going. People look to leaders for that kind of guidance. Say, we're going in this direction. This is where we're going to be. And sometimes you don't know exactly how you're going to get there. And I always caution that. It's like, with Doug Beal, the head coach of this team, he didn't know how he was going to get from 1981 and this incredible group of talented players to the gold medal in 84. He didn't know it was going to take him through the mountains of Utah.
Right.
1981, when he probably, if someone told him that part of your journey was going to be snowshoeing through Utah, he probably would have laughed, but it ended up being the case. So, your strategy can be flexible, your vision should be fixed.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so it's a really important question, and you got to think about it. Sometimes you have to write about it, you got to talk to other people about it. But I think it's an important thing for leaders to really get clear about, is where do you want to be?
You had, and it was in multiple places, but you replicated at the end, and I wrote this down. You have 2 questions that, as you're summarizing at the end of the book, that I feel are really powerful for teams to think about and consider. So the first is, what is the mission and vision of this organization? And the second is, what ground rules, and then I make a slight change here, can we, and then I put I adopt to ensure we are, or I am, a high performing team. And I put that I piece in because it is both the team collectively and the participants, whether it's a leadership team or an ad hoc team that we pull together to do an important project, that we have to do it individually and collectively simultaneously. So I think those were very powerful questions that people can use as a filter as they're reading this book and they're looking at it. Those are great questions to continue to think about, because the team did have all kinds of, as you alluded to earlier, the beach players versus the indoor players, and the East and the West, and the USC and the UCLA and the Pepperdine and the Aztecs, right?
Yeah.
So that was great. Sean, before we go further in our conversation, I always like to ask the audience to participate in answering a question. So here's my question for you. Just like Sean just asked, what is your gold medal? What's your equivalent? And what step could you take to begin experiencing the essence of this mission or purpose for yourself today? So comments below, you know where to put them. I read each and every comment and I will respond to you. Sean, while they're adding comments in the section below, let me ask you this. Tell us something we would never learn from reading your bio or looking at in your social profiles.
About myself, huh?
Yes. Tell us something we wouldn't know.
Well, something that surprises a lot of people is, right after college, before I started my career, I was a tour guide in Alaska, and
Wow.
it was a really fun step in my life because I wanted some adventure and some travel, but I didn't have any money because I had just graduated from college, so I was dirt poor. And so I got hired by a tour, well, it's a cruise ship company called Princess Cruises, and they ran tours. I went to the school at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, so I was in the Puget Sound, Seattle area, and they would run these cruises out of Seattle up to Alaska and back, and they hired me to be a bus driver when people got out of the cruise ship and I'd take them around Alaska. So I got to see Alaska, but more importantly, which was one of my goals, but more importantly, they put me in front of people. I had to lead. I was by myself often on long
Mhm.
trips, leading 40 or 50 people on this bus and talking to them about Alaska history and Alaska geography and wildlife. And it was just a huge stretch assignment for me as a young man to figure out. I liked working with people. I liked um, learning, growing, meeting people, leading these little troops. And I thought, maybe this would align with what I wanted to do in life, and it did. And so, anyway, that was something that a little period in my life that was really important to me
I
in my
love
growth.
that. This is
Yeah.
this is just a interesting connection. My mom and stepdad went on a princess cruise to Alaska. I have no idea. I have to go back and ask them. I mean, I remember it, but I don't remember exactly what year that was. It'd be
It-
interesting to know if they got on the bus with you.
Maybe they were on my bus. I was in Fairbanks for a good chunk of that time.
You never know. I find oftentimes I'll talk to people and you just never know how small a world it is and the connections that you make. Do you have any final thoughts before we close out? Anything you'd like to share?
Well, you mentioned a little bit in your previous question about the individual role versus the team role.
Mhm.
And what's my mission and my vision? What's the team's mission and the team's vision? And I think in this book, what I learned in writing the book was I I had to learn about a lot of the individual stories of some of these players and their individual journey. So I was telling the story of the team, but of course along the way you have to tell the story of the individuals.
Yes.
And I thought that was really fascinating and interesting to see how certain individuals dealt with trying to be on this team, trying to make the team, committing to the team, sacrificing. There were some players that were really talented that didn't want to sacrifice and
Mhm.
commit for the gold medal. And there were some players that weren't quite as, you would say, maybe talented on the court, but they were team players and they were really committed to whatever it would take to make the team better. And at a certain point, another pivot point, maybe you might say, in the journey, Doug Beal and the coaching staff had to decide, do you want to take the player that is really good, really talented, but not as committed versus the player that's just maybe a slightly less talented, but extremely committed. And they went with the player that was extremely committed to the
Mhm.
team. And that made the difference in these individuals' lives that they ended up on the medal stand and they now have a gold medal, and that sort of changed the trajectory of their life. And in fact, one of the players was on the team, then he got cut, and then he came back and became the captain. And that particular player is on the that particular player is on the cover of the book. Yeah. I'll get that dog out. Okay.
Yeah, yes. His
Yeah,
name
that's
is
fine.
Sirius Black.
Yeah,
He's a
that's
lab,
okay.
and
I,
every so often he sees a shadow on the window, and most of the time he's super quiet during these. And both yours and the last one I did, and I asked somebody in the family to take them away, and that didn't happen. So
yeah. No, I've got a
minor
dog.
details.
So
But yeah, I love that because um he did make a difference to the team, and that element of commitment is so important to having a team function in a way that um, is caring, is uplifting, is, you know, doing the things because this is what we collectively need to do in order to succeed together. So that's really great.
yeah, he had an interesting role because he didn't have a lot of playing time at the Olympics, even though he was the captain. Yet
Mm-hmm.
he had a very, very important role in leading the team towards a gold medal. And I think there's a real lesson there. And so you'll find out more if you read the book, just
Yes,
how
and
important
I
he was.
totally encourage folks to read the book. So what I want to do is just first of all, thank you so much for your time. And I also want to thank everyone who has taken the time to listen or view the conversation with Sean and I. Please subscribe to the channel so you know when the next awesome conversation will hit the feed. And as well, you'll get the chance to learn from these folks who have things to share, insights and techniques and all kinds of elements of stories that other people have gone before you to grow your leadership and live for today and not someday. You can learn more about SeanPMurray and real-time performance by visiting his website, which is realtimeperformance.com. You can listen to his The Good Life podcast at SeanPMurray.net. I will include in the video description all of his social profiles and the links that I just talked about, but as well, the link for you to find If Gold is Our Destiny on Amazon. So with that, with one more thank you, I just want to encourage you to go forth and do great things. Thank you so much.